Welcome to the STARS program, seniors taking active roles in society. And now, here's your host, ANITA FINLEY.
Another author, but one of the better authors that we've featured in Boomer Times. Book of the Month in the July issue. And it was really a very, very exciting book. And it was called Miami Iced. I love the name because I love Miami Vice. But Miami Iced, the cover's gorgeous. It's by Susan Sussman, who is here with us in the studio in Boca. And we welcome you to the show, Susan.
Hi, I'm delighted to be back.
And you know, the first thing I said to her, because she's such a talented writer, is, all right, what's next, Susan?
Well, I'm working on actually two books. I'm working on a mystery sequel to Miami Ice that takes place in my neck of the woods, which is down further south in near Hollywood and that area. And the other one is a standalone about a grandmother who's dealing with the loss of family in war and women in war. And that's a very different thing. These other books are very light, but it's something of interest to me.
And why is that?
I think I did not have a personal experience with that. But every time I read a story about a young life lost, my first thought was, how does the mother or the grandmother, very often the people who raise that child, how can they bear that pain? And I never saw that dealt with. And so I began exploring it and talking to people, and I created this character who's always been the bedrock of her family, a grandmother who lost her husband and members of her family to war. And one day she just, it becomes too much. I mean, she's very solid, very grounded, and she decides to just set off on a walk. And it's called Mama Selma's Walk. And it's sort of like that. But that's heavier than, I have done more weighty books, but lately I've wanted to do the more upbeat books, the fun books, the books people say, oh, yeah, that was like popcorn. I like to write popcorn. But I had an idea. A lot of people I know, and well, let me start by saying this. Last month, I lost my aunt, and she was 93. It was my father's little sister. And my cousin called me from Chicago and said, would you come and help me go through my aunt's photos and her papers? And so I flew into Chicago, and there is 90 years worth of photos and everything. And we're going through them, and many family members, we have no idea who they were, and even those we knew didn't have any stories to go with the names. We had nothing of who were these people, where were they, why did they come here from another country, what were their lives like, what were they, and I thought, it's time, we're in our 70s now, my cousin and I, and it's time to start making a little note here and there of things we might be able to leave about ourselves. I do it in my writing, but just in particular about our lives. And I think people are concerned with, how do you leave a legacy? How do you leave a sense of who you were beyond this uncle standing in the background? And
let me just share something with you, which is interesting. I have never, maybe because I haven't had the time, but I haven't been deeply interested in ancestry and going after. I knew who my grandparents were, and I had that good fortune, and I knew who my aunts and uncles were. But I have a cousin who's just fervent about this. So she has been finding people. She has gone abroad. She just found some more people from, in New York. But this is the interesting thing. She just sent me a birth certificate and a marriage certificate from my grandparents.
And
she just sent it. It was very exciting. And there was one error that we've been thinking was right, and this shows it's different. But she is so into this. She's met more new family members that we never even heard of. So I understand what you're saying now.
Right, and I don't have any interest in ancestry the way you did. We do also have the cousin who does this and keeps it on the computer, and we always get a note of. But that is not as interesting to me as, although I guess maybe you can do it online, is to give a story, some moment. And it occurred to me the easiest way to leave something of yourself is in the morning or in the afternoon when you're sitting down for a late afternoon drink, just call up a memory. Call up some moment in your life. Doesn't have to be chronological. And just jot it down. And you can keep it in a notebook. You can, but something of who you were. And I was thinking of things like I remember when I was little in California, we would take our little wagons around the block and collect newspapers. I remember it's for the war effort. And I remember everybody had a victory garden. And I remember the Iceman. Do you remember? The Iceman would come because nobody had refrigeration. And he would come in this huge truck, and he'd throw this piece of leather over his shoulder, and he'd start hacking off pieces of ice to bring into the homes. Kids today have never heard of an ice
You're
box.
right.
But it's a little piece of something from my past, something I saw. Anyhow, this has been on my mind that it would be nice to create a sense of who you are. So when you go, this can be passed on with the photos that are part of the family that are passed on.
I'll tell you something interesting, too, that just happened. I got an email, just happened yesterday, from, I know the name, and I'm going to say the name because some people listening will know who Murray Green was. Murray Green was a manager of a big TV station here. And he had done a lot of good things, and then when WXCL they were fighting to be the only television and radio station as they had been. Then WLRN came in. There was a lot of things, and he was always part of this. A very nice man, though, and he tried to help me with a few things. So I received this email. I didn't know anything about him. I haven't spoken to him for a long time. It's from his wife, and his wife says, Murray Green passed away. I don't know exactly how old he was. Passed away today. But he left a letter that he wanted me to give to anybody in his Rolodex because he had some sort of a relationship with them. And this was, hello, good morning or something. I'm dead now, but I want to tell you.
That's getting the lead right out there.
And he started appreciating and talking, and he said, I had a wonderful life, and I love my family, and they did this and that, and I hope that you're going to do well in your business. I was just floored. I said, gee, I've never received anything like this from the grave. And he had said, when I die, please send this out.
What a gift.
What a delightful... I'll throw that to you, but maybe you can use it somewhere.
I think it's a terrific idea.
It is. You could see, I'm sure he wrote this, years ago. I don't know if he knew he was dying. I don't even know the circumstances, but everybody could write something like that, just sharing their life. And he said, sometimes I know I was not the nicest person when I did this, or I was this, but he said, but I really enjoyed all of you, and I enjoyed my life, but especially my grandchildren and my wife, and I hope that everyone does well. And it was just lovely.
And that will go on. You just passed that on.
And now other people are probably going to do this.
What a gift it is to all of us.
So it's kind of what you're saying in a way that people want to know about people.
Yes.
I didn't know very much about him other than some business things. Now I knew a lot more about him.
Right. And I am always gathering people because as a writer, you only live one life, and I need many lives. So I'm always talking to people or listening very hard. And I really want to know stories of these people in the photos in my photo album at home because they had hard lives in Rust Pole. And, and I don't know. I asked my grandmother once, my mother's mother, what was your life like before you came to the United States? And she said, don't talk about it. And that's as much as I ever got. So it had to be pretty horrific.
Right. And my grandmother came from Hungary, and I used to say, where exactly? Where? And she'd say, well, I don't remember something, because when we went to Hungary, we tried to trace steps, and we couldn't find any place.
Right.
So you're right. They somehow, I don't know, maybe they had too hard a life, and maybe they didn't want to really think about that.
My grandmother wanted nothing to do with any country besides America, and her mother was a chicken flicker. My great-grandmother...
What's a chicken flicker?
Well, when you have a chicken, you have to take the feathers, and you flick the chicken. And so she, in order to be home and watch my mother while my grandmother worked, she flicked chickens, and that was... So they were not wealthy people,
Of course.
You can't earn a lot flicking chickens.
Right. So
But they ate. I mean, there's always a chicken around.
Of course. But when you think of it now, so then when you have these pictures that you said you had.
Yes.
And there are no stories to go with them. That must, for somebody, it's too bad. Does no one in your family knows about those stories?
No, they're gone. My aunt was the last connection. Now I am the guardian of the gate. And I certainly would like to leave something before I move on and the next generation steps to that part. But I'd like to leave little
You've been
snippets.
An author. You have. You're unusual. Most people aren't as successful in what you've done. But you're talking about just the grandmother or the person at home, or maybe they haven't done anything but taking care of their family.
You know something? When I was young, I remember I was in Chicago, 2nd or 3rd grade, and somebody came and said, well, write about something for your life. And I remember sitting there thinking, what are you talking about? I never did anything. I'm not a princess. What can I write about? Well, fast forward many years, and I came to a time when I had a little girl, and she wanted a Christmas tree. And I said, well, Jews don't celebrate Christmas in the home, but, you celebrate with your friend in their home. And I remember back to Chicago, 2nd grade, wanting a Christmas tree so much I couldn't stand it. And my mother said, no, there's no such thing. And then a girl got a Hanukkah bush in my class, and I came home, can I have a Hanukkah bush? She said, there's no such thing as a Hanukkah bush. And I wrote a book out of this memory of a little girl who was nothing big. She wasn't a princess. She was a little girl who desperately wanted a Christmas tree. And it was called There's No Such Thing as a Hanukkah Bush, Sandy Goldstein. It was my bestseller for 27 years, and then we made it into a movie, and it won an Emmy.
Oh, wait a minute. Wait. Now, see how much now I know about you.
Yeah, well.
This is amazing.
It came from this small memory. That's what I'm saying. And you could have written what we were talking about before. You could have written about how you wanted a Christmas tree. It was such a forbidden thing to want that, But I did. And if you can tap into those things that you wanted, those things that brought you great joy, those things that frightened you, and just write a little bubble of a scene and leave that maybe with photos from that period, you're leaving something precious.
Now, it's funny that this should come up, too. I hadn't thought about this, but my mother wanted to have a Christmas tree. My father said, no, we don't have Christmas trees. So what my mother did is she got some snow that this is in New Jersey, put snow on the bottom, the floor on a white sheet, and then she put the gifts there. And I guess my father allowed that, but I always wanted a Christmas tree also. So when I married someone that wasn't Jewish, the first year was we had to have this Christmas tree. It was the biggest thing. My mother loved it.
Right.
So, I mean, it's funny how something like that is so, it stays in our mind, doesn't it? But we don't talk about it. It's the first time I've talked about this with you or with anyone.
The reason it sold so quickly, that book, it landed in the hands of an editor who was Gentile, who had married a Jewish author. And she said until she married Jerry, it never occurred to her that Christmas could be a difficult season for a little Jewish kid who wants a Christmas tree. And she bought the book because it resonated with her.
Must have been a wonderful book, but I mean, you developed it and that was the main thrust of the book.
Yes, it was this little 8-year-old girl's longing for something that was so forbidden in her.
But how much? But it can't go all through years. I mean, it was.
It was just this moment. It was just this moment in time, and it came to a beautiful resolution. And it's really about sharing. My best friend was Catholic, and we walk every morning to a certain corner, and then she would turn left to Mount Carmel, and I would turn right to DeWitt Clinton, and then, we'd come back after school and meet again. So she always had the Christmas tree, and then she'd come over and she'd celebrate Hanukkah, and we shared. And that was, I think, a beautiful solution for me anyway, because I got to do everything I wanted with people I loved. It worked out very well.
Okay, so now your new book. So when you talk, though, about these, about people who are interesting, but there's no history, how are you going to find it?
Yeah.
Is that a novel? What kind of a book would that wind up being?
I haven't even thought of that in those terms. I haven't thought of this as a book. I think of this as a project. You mean of people wanting to learn more of the history?
Yes, of course it could be. I was thinking that this would be a book that
could be a
somebody...
plot step. It could be a plot step. In fact, the light mystery that's coming after Miami Iced, Miami Pumped, it's called.
Miami what?
Pumped. It has to do with the injections, the Brazilian butt lifts, and all these amazing. You know, I live further south than you do, and the bodies down there are perfectly sculpted. These women are magnificent, but unfortunately, people who want to do the injections for less money go to these scam artists, and some women die from the Brazilian butt lift in particular. Because they're injected with all kinds of terrible things. So, but the two main characters, the one recently widowed and her sister, receive an inheritance from an aunt who passes away, and it's a house. It's a bungalow. And very well, we could use something like that, some history of the aunt. That could be a plot step. Thank you.
Oh, well, I'm
going to write it right in there.
Yeah, you're so good at all this. I want to think about you, though. So if you could leave something for your family to know. Now, of course, your immediate family knows you, and they know things. But what about great-grandchildren that are going to come up? What do you want them to know?
I would like them to know what concerns me, what I think about, what I notice, how I feel I think people should be treated, and how I think it works for me to have a certain kind of optimism and always looking forward. It doesn't work for everybody. I believe a lot of it is DNA, but I think it's tremendous benefit when you wake up in the morning and you think, what's next? If you always have something ahead to look forward to, even if you can't make it for a health reason or something comes up, at least you're always looking forward. There's small things like that, and I can probably find moments in my life when this has come into play, as well as those moments when you're defeated for the moment. And how do you get through that? And how do you give yourself permission to just wait a minute, let this pass? And I think things, and funny stories, historical stories about, I have Bubby Dubby, who is, she was an aunt who lived turn of the century, and she's famous because she lived on Maxwell Street, which was like Hester Street in New York. It's all the push carts and the street and the chaos and the tumult, and she was shopping one day, and a merchant, one of these guys with the horse-drawn wagon, shouts out, his horse is dead, his horse is dead. And, if the horse dies, you can't do business. And she goes over, and there's the horse in the harness, fell down dead. And Bubby Dubby, the story goes, puts down her packages, kneels down beside the horse, and does a laying on of the hands, and the horse comes alive. This is the family story about Bubby Dubby.
Oh my goodness!
So
that's a good story.
So it's a good story. I'm sure there's a logical explanation.
Yes, maybe the horse had too much to eat, or just
maybe something. But there are little stories you can share that, whether they're true or not, however they happen, they're family stories.
It's interesting you should talk about this because my husband's very smart about a lot of things, and he wrote an autobiography, not a book, but one that's in a book form, but with pictures and with what he's done all the way up to 80. And so it's there.
Wow.
And he gives it to people who aren't even related. It's a magnificent book, in a sense. And then he started on another one, and he says, now at 80, I'm going strong, and wait for the next 90. Now, he's just going to be 93 on Sunday. He has so much to write, and he does do that. So I know a lot more about him than I ever knew when I married him. I've been married for 42 years, but...
I think when you sit down and you start to write, things come up that you have forgotten for years. I mean, it can be 70 years you don't remember. And all of a sudden, as you're writing, something will spark. I mean, memory is such a fascinating element of us anyway, how it works, how the brain works, and it sparks. And you get into this zone
So for people who are listening, I want you to know this is a wonderful, brilliant woman who's so kind and so sweet. Her name is Susan Sussman. And Susan has a wonderful husband.
I do indeed, Barry.
Yes, and I'm trying to remember his name again.
Barry, a Renaissance
such
man.
Such a great husband.
Yes, he is. 53 years. We just celebrated 53.
53.
Yes.
Boy, you think about people who are celebrating their 40th anniversary years ago, what they looked like, and you look like a young chick. It's just great. But I wanted you to know Susan Sussman. I want you to buy the book she did write, because just like she's talking now, she's so interesting. But Miami Iced is great, especially if you like to know what goes on in courtrooms.
Yes.
And I loved your characters in that. And as a matter of fact, I was invited first time to go to be a juror, and I'd never been one. But I had so many strategic challenges that week, I could get out because I was 70.
Right.
And I didn't do it, but I wanted to do it, and I didn't. But maybe next time I will, because I really enjoyed your book and how people didn't belong in these courtrooms. They were just outsiders, but that became like a club.
Right. They are they exist everywhere in the United States
and
I
didn't know
the
that.
world.
I mean, that was excellent.
Court buffs, yeah.
Right. And you really had a great case, though,
I did.
That you worked on. So people should buy this. You'll get through this pretty fast. It runs very quickly. It is great, and I certainly admire you so much. So I want to ask you some questions, though. So let's say I sat down, and there's so many things in my life that no one really knows. Actually, this is my second husband, so even he doesn't know some of the things I did when I was 14, 15, 16. How do you just write a sentence and then go to another sentence? How do you tie it all in? Because then that takes a lot of time. Would you suggest I say, oh, I remember when I was this, or I remember this, and just write it down?
I would suggest not thinking of this as a major project. I would suggest thinking of this as telling somebody in your life, let's say you're telling a child that you know or a person you know, just as if you're telling them this moment. Don't worry about chronology. It could have happened 10 years ago. It could have happened 60 years ago. Just write down this moment and put it in a 3-whole notebook or do it on computer. And then the next day or the next day after that, pick at random some moment when an emotion was evoked. That helps. Or find a photo where it says something. You want people to know what was this photo about. Excuse me.
This is really great information for me. I mean, I usually always telling other people what to do. It's rare that I can get, to do with things like this. But I had not thought, because I said, gee, if I have to do this, it's a big undertaking. How am I going to take the time?
Not at
You're
all.
telling me that when I think of this little thing that happened, or that happened, or when my grandmother passed away, she was lying on the floor and we found her. Things that just...
My God, what a dramatic moment.
Right. And I haven't told that to anybody. Well, a lot of things like this. So just write it down and then just leave it.
Just leave it. Don't worry about it. It's not War and Peace. It's a moment. And if you, one of the greatest books on writing I ever read said, nobody can write a novel, but everybody can write a scene. And really, ostensibly, that's what you're doing. You're writing a small scene. And then, whenever you have time again, you write another small scene, and you keep them in a book. And you tape up photographs that were from the same period and name some of those people. But don't think of it as I have to write a book. I can't write. I can't spell. I can't spell. That's why God invented editors. But you sit down and you do it because nobody's lived your life but you. And those stories are going to be gone when you're gone unless you write something down.
And I'm thinking of all our listeners who are probably over the age of 50, 60. And they have so much, and don't die before you put this down,
Put
right?
something
I love
down.
this.
Or speak it into a recorder,
right?
If you're more comfortable verbally, which many people are.
This is just a great show. I was going to talk about your book, but if nothing else, you just gave people a reason to get up, is what you said. They may not be feeling well that day, but think of one thing in your life that you want to share with someone. It may be when you just when people used to spend a lot of time having picnics because there was no other place to go.
Right.
And I have a lot of scenes of my grandparents and kids on the beach or somewhere, and they bring I remember the hard-boiled egg. That's what we had. Tomato, hard-boiled egg, and something else. That was the lunch.
Right.
Right, because it didn't spoil and there wasn't ice.
We were just out of town, and we went to see an art exhibit called Coney. And it was all about Coney Island. I've never been to Coney Island, but there were photos that were taken in the 30s and 40s of 1 million people crammed together, body to body. You couldn't even lay down. And they would go on the weekends to be at Coney Island, and the excitement of the place and the chaos and the tumult. And it was wonderful. So if you've been to Coney Island, that might be a wonderful memory to share of a day. You know, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. I think we ought to call this Susan's suggestions or something. But really, Sue, this is a lovely idea, and I know you're going to be writing something really exciting. So, what do you have a title?
No, I don't know how much time we have left.
But you can just keep going.
Okay, well, I did just for today. I set down an example. I don't know if it'll help or not help. But to set the date and the place, it was 1945. I was about 3 years old, living in Los Angeles, California. And this little memory is called the Iceman. And then earlier I spoke about the Iceman, and I remember we'd wait for the Iceman's truck to come, and he'd pull up, and he'd have these huge blocks of ice. And he would, according to whatever the person in the home wanted, what small, medium, or large for the icebox, he would hack off the block for them. But meanwhile, he'd count up how many of those kids were around his truck, and he'd hack off little slivers of ice, and he'd hand them out to us. They were really clear water ice, and we'd suck them like lollipops, and we'd put them from hand to hand because it was so cold, and the ice would run, water would run down our arms, and we just couldn't wait for the Iceman to come. And then he'd take his tongs and put his ice over the leather on his shoulder, and he'd go and he'd deliver his ice. And that's just a little, half a page of memory. That kind of thing is what I'm talking about.
This is just delicious, as that ice probably was at that time because it was probably
was.
very hot.
It was.
Well, Susan, it's been such a pleasure, and I hope people will buy Miami Iced.
Thank you.
ICED.
And
the way they can get that is, can they go to Amazon?
Yeah, they can Google me on Amazon. I have 23 books out, and just pick one.
You're just great. See, that's what your kids will remember you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed it.